Good evening. It is October 25th, 2011. I know that I have not made a video blog in quite a while. A lot of things have been going on, and in the last several months I have taken a break from making these videos. I'm returning today, though, to deliver a speech that I will present tomorrow at a roundtable for a conference at George Mason University, in front of a largely undergraduate audience. It's a huge honor to have been invited to speak at this event. There will be two very distinguished professors at the roundtable, including the dean of the university. So I'm pretty excited about this. The topic is on the American Revolution. I would love your honest feedback and advice. This is my second draft video. I wasn't entirely pleased with my delivery in the first one I posted earlier today. Nobody left me any comments specifically on it. I removed it fairly quickly. If you saw it, I saw some changes in my delivery that I could have made, and hopefully I can make the proper adjustments in this one. I hope you enjoy the talk, and again, I apologize for the poor lighting. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Sensor for inviting me to speak at this roundtable. Political revolutions are an inherently dangerous endeavor, particularly when the revolutionaries threaten to not only seize the reins of power, but also to overthrow the state altogether, replacing it with an entirely new one. Bearing this fact in mind, it's beneficial to ask ourselves, what is the state? Irrespective of whether or not one believes that the government in question is just or unjust, oppressive or benevolent, the state may be defined as an institution that possesses a monopoly on two things: the writing of laws and the initiation of force in order to implement those laws. It obtains its monopoly through either the consent of the majority, and majority consent may exist in a democracy, republic, monarchy, even a dictatorship, or if the government fails to earn that consent, it obtains this monopoly through violence. Because the state possesses this monopoly on the writing of laws and the initiation of force, officials within it are liable to go to great lengths in order to protect it. Those who possess this monopoly are in quite a powerful position. And so there's considerable risk involved in any attempt to overthrow a government. Political revolutions become even more dangerous when the government in question is exceptionally powerful. And this was a dilemma facing the revolutionaries in 1776. Britain was undoubtedly the greatest military power in the world. It was victorious in the French and Indian War, gaining the entire territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. It had the world's greatest navy. The colonists had no navy. On the other hand, Britain's national debt had exploded as a result of their military adventurism, and this was the impetus behind their insistence on direct taxes and tighter controls on the colonies. The British government wanted to use this new revenue in part to fund a standing army of 10,000 military troops on the North American continent, stationed in the various colonial towns and cities. Shortly before the revolution, they declared that the same troops could stay in the home of any colonist without permission from the owner. This was the inspiration behind the Third Amendment to the Constitution. In Massachusetts, they shut down town meetings and restricted the colonial assembly. They closed down the port of Boston. On the economic front, the British regulatory system, known as mercantilism, placed the colonies in a subservient position within the empire. The colonists became increasingly convinced that they were better off governing themselves, and so political revolution followed. Given the tremendous power of the British Empire, it's difficult to overstate the danger that the revolutionaries, including those in the upper ranks, especially those in the upper ranks, faced when they decided that it was time to overthrow the existing government and to install a new one in its place. Make no mistake about it, the Declaration of Independence was quite a radical document. And it remains so. Contrary to the prevailing wisdom of the centuries preceding it, the Declaration asserted that rights come from our humanity, independent of the state. In that document, Jefferson declared quite boldly that government has a right to exist only when it has consent of the governed. One of the most radical parts of that document was when he asserted that, quote, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish, end quote, the government when it no longer has consent of the people. So of course it was radical. It remains so today, 235 years later. Again, you cannot overstate the danger that the revolutionary leadership faced when they decided upon this course of action. It was certainly no guarantee that they would emerge victorious, and if the revolution failed, it could mean imprisonment, execution, an end to their careers and reputations. Obviously, the revolutionary leadership on the whole was acting out of conviction. Frederick Douglass agreed with this point less than a century later, praising the leadership for their courage and conviction throughout the conflict, and stating that he had changed his mind over time about the American system of government. As late as 1779 and 1780, the war looked like it might be lost. The continental paper currency had depreciated in value dramatically. The revolutionary government had begun a war with virtually no funds. So as a remedy, they simply printed the money, and a period of hyperinflation resulted. So when we talk about the merits of top-down versus bottom-up history, it's important to remember that the war was a tremendous risk and struggle for so-called elites, as well as commoners. This explains why so many common people expressed immense gratitude for leaders like Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, and others. One of the things that made the American Revolution so unique and radical was that you did not see the replacement of the British state with an equally powerful state. Oftentimes during a revolution, power-hungry individuals help overthrow a government and then erect an equally or sometimes even more powerful or oppressive government in its stead. The American Revolution did the opposite. It replaced the British state with an incredibly limited Articles of Confederation. Limited in a very radical way. I mean, there wasn't even an executive branch. There was no king, much less a president. And of course, with autonomous local and state governments, who in their part had fairly liberal constitutions as well. Washington could have been king if he wanted, but rejected any such notion. As far as the U.S. Constitution was concerned, it was, in some ways, a conservative counter-reaction to the radicalism of the decade that preceded it. The nationalists wanted a strong central government, and they got it at the convention. The period between the drafting of the Constitution and the final ratification was, technically speaking, a second revolution. The government under the Articles was overthrown illegally and replaced by an entirely new government, one that was slightly more conservative. Still, the Constitution was radically different from any other system in existence at that time. When I say that it was slightly more conservative, this is in relation to the more radical system that preceded it. When lined up against other governments throughout world history, it's among the most liberal. It's easy for us today to take for granted a phrase like, "we the people," but it was truly groundbreaking in the 18th century. It wasn't that long before the Revolution when doctrines like the divine right of kings was accepted as the primary justification for government. Now the state was beholden to the people, although it would be a process before it was extended to all people. It was an incomplete revolution, undoubtedly, but it laid the groundwork for future movements to extend individual liberty and inspired an entire world to challenge their respective governments as well. One remarkable feature about the Constitution was its numerous restraints on the power of the central government. The system of checks and balances was put into place to do just that. For instance, the president was commander-in-chief, but only Congress could take the country into war, even if the president strongly desired to go to war. The main idea behind the Bill of Rights was this very idea of restraining the power of the central government. Americans were by no means anarchists, but a large number of them considered a powerful, distant, centralized state to be absolutely dangerous. Those who did support a more activist government, those people certainly existed, tended to prefer that to be done on a more local and state level, operating under the assumption that the closer officials are to the people, the more likely they are to be responsive to the people. The more distant and centralized a government is, the more likely it is to be overrun by corrupt interests and to defy the will of the people. In fact, many of the anti-federalists who opposed ratifying the Constitution did so for that very reason. They feared that the central government would usurp the power of the local and state governments. In hindsight, the prediction was remarkably accurate, whether one supports centralization or decentralization, and I'm not here to make the case for either. There's no denying that the central government evolved over time into an extraordinarily powerful body. If you look at the ratification debates, the Constitution was indeed ratified because the Federalists, small f Federalists, not to be confused with the Hamiltonians, were able to convince the people that these fears were unfounded. They argued that the new central government was necessarily more powerful than the one under the Articles, but that the restraints made upon it by the Constitution was enough to keep it from becoming too powerful. The Bill of Rights was added in order to calm these fears. The Bill of Rights can be compared to an iron shackle that chains down a potential monster. You don't want to kill that creature because it might do some good, but you also know its potential to do harm, so you chain it down. Supporters of the Constitution conceded that it was more powerful than the Articles, but the Bill of Rights guaranteed, in theory, that it would not become tyrannical. The democratically elected state conventions were convinced, and so the Constitution was ratified. To conclude this talk, yes, it is my view that the American Revolution was indeed very radical in the grand scheme of human history. However incomplete it was. It incorporated the theory and thinking of the 18th century Enlightenment. It challenged age-old assumptions that had been around for thousands of years. And it inaugurated a new period of liberalism that would later dominate the 19th century. Finally, it created a language and discourse of individual rights that would later be employed by female activists and black activists in order to fully extend the sphere of liberty to themselves as well. This is why Frederick Douglass later said that the Constitution was, quote, a glorious liberty document, end quote, while applauding the efforts of the revolutionary leadership. Thank you. All right, well, that's it. Again, that was a second draft. The first draft, I didn't like it. I don't think too many people saw it, but I think I was a little too enthusiastic. Like, I need to, like, okay, it's. I feel pretty good about the speech. I like the content. Is there any advice you have for me? Any comments? I know, it's kind of late in the game. I'm giving it at 10:30 tomorrow morning. But if you do have any major advice, I'll consider it. So leave me a comment. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all later. Bye.